It's going to be a good day. I got a lot of feedback from last week, and it was exciting to have some follow-up conversations with you guys about the first episode in this series. And as we go into today, I thought for a long time about just pausing the series, having kind of a traditional Mother's Day message. And as I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that the value of mothers and fathers in the family was one that is significant in this conversation that we're having about the end of the status quo. Now, if you were gone, I think even by the picture, it might look like we're talking about the second coming of Christ or the tribulation or the rapture or something like that. We're not. We're talking about the moral depravity of our nation, of our society. We talked about Sodom and Gomorrah last week. We read that story. It was a long story, but a good story about the consequences of sin and of moral depravity in a culture and what happens when we arrive at that place. And I'm going to raise this stand up. Otherwise, I'm going to give myself a hernia trying to bend over and look at the page. And I want to start actually with a quote that I got off of Focus on the Family's website today. It says, "When one considers the social structure of civilization, family is clearly the foundational unit upon which church and government rest. Families are created and held together by the lifelong commitment of a man and a woman who live cooperatively and raise and nurture the children born to them. Families are the building blocks essential to the formation of a community, and strong social structure arises from the foundation many families provide." And so there are two things that I want us to really think about and focus on today. And one of you guys go close that door. Oh, someone's got it there. There we go. Think about today is one is family in terms of pillars of civilization, and the second one is the law. Those are the things that I think we need to zero in. And the reason for that is I think after last week we have to ask the question, why? Why has this happened? How did we get here? What causes that? How do we prevent that from happening, either through repentance and through our culture turning around and going in a new direction, or experiencing some kind of a collapse of civilization and we begin to rebuild from the beginning? How do we rebuild our society, our civilization, our culture on the right pillars so that it does not once again begin to crack and crumble? And to do that, I'd like for us to look first at Proverbs chapter 31. As we look at the family, as we celebrate Mother's Day today, and we understand the vital role of family, particularly of the nurturing nature of the mom in the home. And I know that not everybody had the privilege of having that. And so by no means does that mean you're crippled forever and you can't ever be a productive person because you didn't have a mother in the home or you had a bad relationship with your mother. By no means hear me saying that. But there is a strength and there is a lifelong character build that stems from that. And so when we have a season of time, or even perhaps even if you went your entire childhood without that influence, it's something that we can still gain from other women in our life. And in fact, I appreciated Pastor Jeff talking about that the value of the mom in terms of the heartache that can happen on days like today. For somebody like me, my mom, my wife, who is the mother of my children, are alive and well, and so it's a day of rejoicing for me. But for many, their moms are not. For many have had miscarriages and other problems, maybe having children at all, and it can be a really hard holiday. It can be really tough. It can be a time of weeping and sorrow and sadness, and a day that you don't look forward to. And so I am mindful of that, and I recognize the heartache and the hardship that can be. And so I think it is something that we should not take for granted, and it is something that as a culture we should understand the significance and the importance of being trained up and sharpened and having our character built by the mom in the home. And I'm so thankful for women who take on that motherly responsibility even for others that aren't their own children. What a blessing that is, and I'm thankful for that. So let's read that together. It says, beginning in verse 10, "A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good and not harm all the days of her life." So let's pause there for a moment. I think it's interesting. It says all the days of her life. In other words, we can all be good, quote unquote, for a while, right? I mean, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, once a week, I can do my fatherly duty or my duty as a son, but to consistently do it, to consistently bring blessing to the family, to the home, that's pretty tough. That's a pretty big challenge. And so I think that we have to be careful that we don't skip that part of it and just think, well, yeah, okay, I'm a pretty decent mom, I'm a pretty decent dad, I'm a pretty decent son, pretty decent daughter, and just say, well, I'm going to call it good and move on, because that's what we do. If you're in my generation, if you're a Generation Xer or a millennialist and down, that's kind of what we do. We're not the best finishers. We like to start things. We like to be done with things, but in the middle there, in that process, we probably struggle a little bit with that compared to some of the older generations. We struggle to persevere because we've not had the challenges and the obstacles that many that are in the boomers and the busters have had, and so we have a hard time with that. But we need to recognize that the consistency is what counts. We got a strange noise. Should I switch to another mic, or what's the deal there? What do you guys think? I can see you do not know what's going on any more than I do. Well, let me switch to this guy. We'll just eliminate that other one and get rid of that noise. Is that better? Okay, good deal. Probably the weather, probably that thunderstorm interfering. So let's go on then. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark, and she provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. Now let's talk about that for a moment. What in the world is flax, and what are we saying here? So in other words, she recognizes the responsibility of nurturing in her life. And it's not just limited to, we can see here, it talks about her family, but also for her servant girls. In other words, the people that are outside of her immediate family. At that time, it was not uncommon to have servants and people that worked for you, not just in a farming type sense, but generally. And so you were not responsible only for your own family, but for them as well. Not unlike an employer is responsible for, or should be responsible for, their employees, for taking care of them. So it goes far beyond that, and she recognizes the responsibility of both of those things. She considers a field and buys it, and out of her earnings she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. Now, what makes an arm strong? Working, right? Doing something over and over and over again. That makes you stronger, makes you more able to accomplish that task. So notice that consistency. It's kind of hidden for us a little bit there. But consistently, they're there, working behind the scenes, oftentimes unnoticed, and yet when they're not there, we notice, we miss that, right? If you're used to having the kitchen in a certain state and having a meal cooked for you in the evening, or having laundry done, and then all of a sudden it's not, you notice it pretty well. You don't notice it necessarily as much whenever all those things are being provided, but when it stops, why we notice that. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In other words, she just keeps on working, even past normal, what we would consider normal closing hours. She's still going, she's still working. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. In other words, she's generous. She has a giving heart. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. Okay, in other words, she plans ahead, right? And that's something that has really struck me recently getting in more into farming, and there are certain things you just have to plan ahead. You can't go to Walmart or somewhere, MFA, and to bail you out in many cases, like you can in a lot of ways of life. You don't have time to cook dinner, no big deal. You just go somewhere and eat, or you grab some dinner somewhere. If you need deodorant, you need hairspray, you need whatever, you just go and get it. But back in the old days, you had to make all these things and prepare them ahead of time, and particularly for winter. And it's actually this way in Alaska. There's a great show, I think I've mentioned it, that talks about people that kind of homestead in Alaska, and it's quite a challenging ordeal. But what amazes me is that they only have about 3 or 4 months of warm weather to do all the things they need to do to prepare for winter. And you don't want to be caught in the middle of winter and not have food and different things. And so it's a great example, and that's really what's being alluded to here, is that a good mom, a good wife, one of noble character, plans ahead, is prepared for the contingencies of life. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. Now, why might he be respected in the context of this? What do you guys think? Because of his wife. That's right. That's right. Because she is a woman of noble character, and so he is respected. And so there's really, in any marriage, we're not really islands. That the idea that we become one flesh is more than just a nice little ritually statement that we make at the wedding ceremony. It's very true. It means that we become part of one another and a reflection on one another. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. All right, which is a big temptation for us in our culture, and I think it's one of the things that as we look at what's wrong, as we look at the consequences that we are now suffering as a nation, I think one of the things that we see is that idleness has come out and bit us. It has hurt us. That because we have had a choice, all right, there's not this imminent need to go out and kill something to eat it for dinner, that we have had for many thousands of years before these modern times, because that urgency isn't there, those hunger pains literally are not there, then we have a little bit of a casual attitude to life, and we don't feel good, or we're in a bad mood, and we just say, I'm just going to go sit on the couch and watch a show and do something other than work. And don't hear me saying we should work ourselves in the ground and we need to rest. There is certainly a time for that. We need to have relaxation. But for some of us, idleness can get us into trouble, and so we need to avoid that. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And I would note, husbands and children, this is not just when she does all of these things, but we should offer that blessing generously to her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And why does it end with that? Why does it say a woman who fears the Lord? Well, we know that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? Wisdom, right? And God said that if you love me, you'll keep my what? My commandments. So if we fear God, that we will keep his commandments, and then we will be blessed because of that. And it's not only, when I was younger, I used to always think that happened because God was just kind of watching to see if I did what he wanted, and then if I did, he was just going to strike me with blessing and go, oh, he was a good little boy, so there you go, you're blessed now. But I think not only that, and I do certainly think that happens at times, but I think we're blessed because those laws, those commandments are there for our benefit. Because there are consequences for every action that we make, positive and negative. And when we make choices that are wise, just like this woman of noble character that we see here in Proverbs, then blessing comes from that automatically. That's just the natural outcome of that. It's just like drinking water. When I drink water, it's not magic that happens, right? My body absorbs that and the digestive process happens and I am refreshed and I can continue to live and breathe and walk upon the earth because that is the natural consequence of me drinking water, right? And it's the same thing as keeping God's commandments, which I think is what brings us then to this next part and the second pillar that we're discussing today, and that's the law. The law. Now, when we say the law, I think there are a lot of things probably need to be explained because there are a lot of different laws and interpretations of what that word means. And I won't be lengthy because I know that for you moms, the greatest gift that I could give to you today would be a not long-winded sermon. So I'm going to try to bless you today with a short and hopefully still meaty message. But I think we have to pause for a moment and talk about that word because otherwise we're going to get into this discussion and all be in different places. There is only one law. We might have laws that make things legal or illegal. We might have judges and other people that make determinations about these laws, but there is only one law. All right, there's one correct set of things that are right, one correct set of things that are wrong. Now, I know that in our culture that can sound very ignorant. And you think, oh, well, that is just ridiculous. We haven't believed that since the 1950s. But first of all, I would like to humbly submit that if you don't recognize that doesn't change the fact that there are still right and wrong. If you'd say, oh, well, that might be right for you, but it's not right for me, that certainly doesn't change the fact that there are right things and wrong things. And so I want to be clear about that and not take a stand in an arrogant and haughty way or anything like that, but just to humbly say there is a path that leads to righteousness. There is a path that leads to life, both for us personally and for us as a nation. And there is a path that leads to death and darkness. And the Bible even says that the path of darkness and destruction is wide and long, and it's a big path that many travel, and that only few travel that narrow path. So even from just that information alone, we know that it's not a simple path. It's not an easy path. Anybody who thinks that following God or even being a quote-unquote moral person, that is no simple task. So let's talk a little bit about this, and we're actually going to look in Exodus chapter 20. I cannot remember the last time I preached on the Ten Commandments, and I think that's because we just assume, well, everybody knows what the Ten Commandments are and why we got them and why they're here. They used to be everywhere. You would go to any court, you still go to the Missouri Capitol and other places and see the Ten Commandments, and their significance because our nation, our judicial system, our executive branch of government, every aspect of our government was based on this standard, on these laws. And the earliest form of that is the Ten Commandments, the tablets that were given directly from God to Moses, who took them down off of Mount Sinai. And I think it's important that we make this distinction, and here's why. If we begin to say, well, there isn't really right and wrong, there's not really a right way to live and a wrong way to live, we're not just being disobedient and we're not just taking the path of sin, but we're bringing destruction on ourselves. That's just like saying, well, because really where that ends is murder's not bad. If somebody wrongs me and I get mad at them, I should have the right to kill them. And well, stealing isn't bad. If I'm hungry and I need food, I'm just going to go take it. See, that's where that reasoning gets. And I don't think we think that through when we start down that path and we start saying, well, this is probably okay, or this isn't as bad as this, or I'm not as bad as this person. I think that path is a slippery slope, and that's where we arrive. And we finally come to the place that we came last week with the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were so morally depraved that they had to be eliminated, that God wiped them off the face of the earth. Not because he was mad and lost control, but because he had to rid the world of the sinful acts that were happening there. So let's read these together. Hopefully you know them, and if I were to pass out a little quiz, you guys would all pass the quiz and say, oh yeah, I know what the Ten Commandments are. But let's read this together, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. It's found in Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for their father's sin to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who keep me and keep my commandments. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will punish anyone who misuses his name. Remember to dedicate the Sabbath day. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And you must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the foreigner who is with you within your gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them in 6 days, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Honor your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife, his slaves, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, hopefully you're familiar with those, and I think those probably fit fairly well, at least the latter set of those with our current laws in the United States of America. But I think we forget sometimes that the law is the pillar of our, not only of our society, but it is the pillar of our political system. What separates us as a republic from other types of governments, like communists, like democracies, like, you fill in the blank, dictatorships, is that in a republic, it is the law that determines how people live. Right? It's not the will of the people. That's democracy. This is not a democracy. People get confused about that all the time. It's a republic. And if you go back and you look at all of the documents, the original Constitution and those documents, you'll see that word republic appear many times. And in the republic is the rule of law. And certainly we can amend certain facets of that because it's not so simple. Because even as we read these commandments, we can see, well, what about this and what about that aren't mentioned? So certainly there needs to be laws that determine what we do in different situations. But we need to recognize that our civilization is built on the rule of law. And I understand that's controversial. I understand that some people don't like that truth, and I apologize for that, and it's because I don't like to make anybody disappointed or upset. But that doesn't change the fact that that's how our forefathers, people like John Adams and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, that is how they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the other documents from which we live our lives. Now, as you can probably imagine, the problem is that we have fallen away from that pillar as well. Just like we've fallen away from the family as being a building block of civilization, we've fallen away from that idea that it's the rule of law that determines how we live. Now, let me explain why that's important and why the distinction between democracy and communism and socialism is important. Let's say all of a sudden, because in a democracy, it's the majority rule, right? So everybody votes and says, well, we should do this or we shouldn't do this. Well, what if everybody decides to vote to take away your house? Or votes and decides to say, oh, well, because you're white, you can't vote anymore. Or because you're white, you can't do it. See, that's the problem with democracy. And so in a republic, it's the law that determines this thing. So you see the difference. In a dictatorship, one person decides. All right? You have a dictator, and they say, well, you're all going to give me all your money and goods, and they send out their military guys, and they hold a gun to your head, and you don't want to be shot, so you go, okay, and you hand over all your stuff. All right? An oligarchy is similar to a dictatorship, with the difference that you have just a few people that rule, and that's how the Soviet Union was. It was an oligarchy. It was also communist and socialist, but it was really an oligarchy, and then you had a few people that made all the decisions. But at the end of the day, and you might say, well, man, we're getting all political and we're talking politics. Well, kind of, but really what we're talking is history. Really what we're talking is how we have lived and what will become of us after this time. That's really what we're talking about. And you can say, well, that's political. I don't know that it is. I think what it is it's how you're going to live. It's how your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren are going to live. And the further that these pillars are eroded in our culture, the further that slide and that decay and that impending doom, if you will, is upon us. Now, I think it's interesting as we look here. There is, and some of, I get questions all the time about this third and fourth generations, about God punishing children for the father's sin. Because on the one hand, we do see that occasionally, but then we also see the doctrine of grace where God forgives everything. He separates our sin as far as the east is from the west. And so we get confused about that. So I want to underline something for you here. If you look at that, it says that he will punish the children for their father's sin for those who hate me, but he will show love to those who love him and keep his commandments. And so what's being said here is that everybody has the opportunity to choose to live by the law, quote unquote. Certainly we have the choice not to. There's no question about that. Where law breaking is, there's probably more law breaking than there is law abiding at the end of the day. But so we need to recognize that God can fix everything. And in fact, we see many times, and we're going to look at this next week in 1 Kings and in Chronicles, where the nation of Israel made decisions to walk away from God, to walk away from the law, to walk away from his protection, and they brought on themselves a lot of problems as a civilization. And I think it is valuable for us as we begin to look and we begin to ask and inquire as to how the world really is. I think it's important for us to recognize that we can see this pattern of events happening over and over and over and over in history. And I know that because certainly I have children, and I know that particular subject is not always the most popular subject. It and math and sometimes science kind of get in the unpopular category. So I get that. In fact, when I was younger, I could just, my eye, like some of you guys, whenever I start preaching, my eyes would just glaze over as soon as, my history teacher would just start going. And part of it was, I thought to myself, and this is kind of, it certainly was ignorance on my part, but I thought to myself, well, this is somebody else that lives in some other time. Why do I care? Why does that matter? Why is that important? I think what's fascinating is I might even say for us as Christians, if we have that attitude, what you're really saying is, well, it's not important to read the Bible, because it's a book of history, most certainly. The problem with that attitude is that we learn, really everything that we learn as people, from an intellectual sense, we're basing it off of history, okay? Now, sometimes when we say history, it's like when we say being a missionary. We think of some person in a faraway land, and we forget that we're called to be missionaries right here. History is what happened 5 minutes ago. All right, I can certainly learn if I'm out on the farm and I walk up to an electric fence and I grab it and it's hot and I experience the pain and agony of grabbing that. I'm going to learn something from that history, right? I'm going to learn not to grab that because that is a bad idea. And so I think it is important for us to change our attitude about that and to recognize that there are valuable lessons for us to learn from not only from history but from the scriptures, which again are a form of history, and that if we fail to learn those lessons, in our illustration, for example, with the electrically charged cattle fence, what's going to happen? We're just going to keep shocking ourselves over and over again. Now, I want to ask you a question. Let's say that you're surfing around on YouTube and you see somebody, and actually there are people that do this, except not with their hand. I won't mention what part of their body they do this with, but there's actually this kind of, it's like cool, or apparently, to go up to an electric fence and see how many times you can zap yourself. But if you're out and you're watching YouTube videos and stuff and you see somebody repeatedly zap themselves on a fence, what are you gonna think? Yeah, they're dumb. Yeah. Or you're going to start laughing. You're going to think, well, this is a comedy. They've done this to be funny or whatever. You're going to just think this, but you're not going to take this individual seriously. And yet, that is exactly what we're doing. As a nation, as individuals, even as our local community, in our state, we're sticking our heads in the sand and we're ignoring the hard-earned lessons of people that have lived before us. And if we don't change something, we're just going to repeat and experience the same consequences that have been experienced by mankind for thousands of years. And it amazes me, we're really not that different at all. Whether we're Asian, whether we're from Europe, whether we're from America, whether we're from Africa, South America, people are people. We're really not that different. We may look a little different. We may have different cultural beliefs and ways that we do things. But we really, at the end of the day, are very similar. And I think that we can learn a lot from other cultures and other people that have come before us. And whether we're history buffs or not, I think that we need to wake up. And we need to look around and we need to see through what people are saying in the media, at work, whatever. We need to lose the nonchalant, casual, apathetic attitude, and we need to get serious and realize that the moral depravity in our culture is going to lead us to ruin. Not just in an economic sense or in a military sense, but it is going to lead us down a dark path from which there is no return. But I believe that God is a God who desires for us to be restored. And I don't think he wants that to happen. I don't think he wants us to go down that path of destruction. I think he wants us to restore the things that once were. And we see that happening in the church at Ephesus, the church in Corinth, the church at Philippi, the church at Antioch, in the New Testament, where God was trying to encourage those churches to go back to their first love, to go back to Christ, we've gotten out on all these little technicalities and things. I mean, it is astonishing. If you have signed paperwork lately to do anything, to buy anything or sell anything, you got to go through a stack of papers this big. How did that happen? That happened because we lost sight of right and wrong. And now everybody has to protect themselves about every tiny little thing. I mean, if you have a typical house insurance policy on your home, you're insuring it against all kinds of ridiculous things, including people walking across your yard and falling and hurting themselves and suing you, which is absurd that would even happen. And yet, that is because I think sometimes, you listen to a message like that and you think, oh, he's just some dramatic preacher, and he's just sat around in his office all week and got all worked up, from reading the Bible and praying or something. And here he is, just spouting off, doing his thing. But I tell you guys, I'm just an average guy, just like, some of you are women, some of you are men, but I'm just an average guy, average person, just like you. And I'm not particularly intelligent. I hope I'm not particularly unintelligent, just pretty average in just about every sense of the word. And I see that our culture is heading towards a cliff. And what's interesting about gravity is it only works one way. And once you go over that cliff, it's pretty well a one-way trip down. And I think that we are in a season where we're not fully committed, but we're pretty well committed to a path that unless something really, truly miraculous changes or happens, we're going to go over that cliff. And and you might say, well, if it does, it does. I can't do anything about it, blah, 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 blah. There is one thing you can do about it. I'm going to tell you right now. Here's what it is. You can fix yourself. I can't fix you. You can't fix me. But you can fix you. I'm going to ask Annette to come up and play a little bit, and we're going to pray about this. It always begins on the individual level. Because I tend to be kind of a big picture guy. I don't like to talk about the small things. I like to talk about the big picture. What's going to happen in America in the next 5 years? And what's going to happen with the economy? And what's going to happen with this and that? But if we want real change, it starts with just us. So remember, Jesus came and he didn't go around all over the whole world winning over millions of people, right? He sought out 12 people and he discipled them and he changed them completely. And then what happened? They changed the world, didn't they? 2,000 years later, here we are. How many churches, how many people have accepted Christ? Look how many civilizations have built their way of living on the pillars of Christ, on the pillars of godliness, on the idea that we should love one another, serve one another, that it's wrong to kill, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to murder, it's wrong to commit adultery, and that in living that way, we are blessed automatically as a civilization. So join me in praying and seeking God. God, we thank you for today. We thank you first for the gift of mothers, all the sacrifices that they make for us, for our children, that most of the time goes completely unnoticed. And I pray for fathers as well today, Lord, that as families and as individuals who are sons and daughters, who are nieces, nephews, grandparents, perhaps our spouse has gone on to be with the Lord. Some of us don't have mothers, some of us don't have children. We're all different, and yet we're part of a family, somewhere, some way, somehow. And God, I pray that you would build a people, a culture, a society, rebuild that society back to the way that it was, that we would return to our first love and do the things that we did at first. With the idea and principles that everyone has a right to be free and has a right to choose. And I pray, Lord, that we would come back to truth and recognize that these commandments that you've given us in the law, not to worship things other than you, not to steal, not to murder. God, I pray that we would build our life upon these things. And if we have built our life on something else, maybe the love of money, the love of a career, the love of a hobby, the love of some other person, God, I pray that you would just help us to disassemble that, tear it down, and to begin wherever we are, even if we have to start over completely from scratch, that we would build our lives on something solid, on something real. God, I pray today for those that have not yet come to the place where they believe in you. God, I pray not for necessarily for some miraculous change or miracle, but very simply, Lord, you would just reveal the truth of how things are to them today. God, I pray a blessing on moms everywhere in every place. Pray a blessing on children, and especially those who have lost their mom. That you would just bring them comfort today as they hurt and as they grieve that loss. Lord, would you just be the healer, the one that restores, the one that brings life to us today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.